Hey there, it's Rook. What is this? This is my first map for the Unreal Engine, UE4. A week and a half ago, I installed Unreal Engine for the first time, and I learned the resources, I watched tutorials, and I built this. It took me just over a week, and now here I am. I'm going to be providing some commentary and explain my thought process behind the design of this level. And perhaps with this, you can see my standards of quality and perhaps even my design skill. You can judge this for yourself just by this presentation. Now, what's the point of this? Well, this is meant to be a showcase to show future Unreal projects that I might want to join. Now, note that as such, this is not a final product by any means. I don't want anyone to be judging this as anything of extreme high quality. This is just a showcase to show my game knowledge, my level design skill, and all that stuff. And as a result, there are no custom assets. There isn't even sound, so you'll just be listening to my own voice. So let's get started. So you're presented with this tutorial. Now, why do I even have a tutorial? Well, as many would say, you would have a tutorial so that new players can come into your game, learn the controls, figure out how to play. Now, normally I wouldn't want to do that if I have controls that are so intuitive, but I do have some mechanics in this that are a little unique, and I wanted to, at the very least, teach this to the player, and it felt out of place to only have a tutorial for just the unique mechanics. So I felt it necessary to show a little bit of everything. And it does kind of show how I design pretty much any kind of level. It helps, I think it helps you understand my thought process. So I think that it's a good way to start. So that's why I went out of my way to make a tutorial. Now, in this first room, you learn how to look around, you learn how to move. And this is a mostly empty room with only two objects of main interest. You have this door, which you cannot interact with. Clicking doesn't do anything to the door, and pressing E doesn't do anything to the door, so obviously the door is not interactable. So the only other thing to check out is this. Player might be wondering if what this is. Maybe it's an egg. So the player goes up to look at it, step on it, and the piece of wood disappears. They realize perhaps that this is a pressure plate. And after searching a bit, they realize that the door is now open. This helps teach the player that this is a button. It helps teach the player what this button does and what they will do in the future. So the player now arrives in the second room. Now this is such a powerful tool. You saw before that I had text in the previous room. I love the in-game text here because it just presents the tutorial right in front of you in the place where it makes logical sense. It doesn't just show up on your screen as a piece of UI. It's actually physically in the world. And that's just so powerful just because it gives the player context and helps the player to understand what they're supposed to be doing. So the player learns to jump. Then the player learns to crouch. And as the player navigates this room, they practice using jumping and crouching. Now on to the next room. Player learns to sprint. If you attempt to jump across this gap, you can't make it because you didn't sprint. So you can try again and you sprint across. Again, after briefly searching, the player finds this piece of text. Press the left mouse button to fire. Player likely has already discovered this, but it is shown to them again just in case. And it is stood next to this button. Now this is a smaller button, and you can't reach it physically. So the only logical option then is to press the left mouse button to shoot it. This activates it and opens the door. So the player is presented with this wall that directs them over to here. Just a little small thing. Now the player then learns to pick up objects and move them around. And the player learns that they can wall jump. And this can be directed in a variety of different ways. And the player is presented with their first problem, their first puzzle. They need to jump on top of here. There are several solutions to this puzzle. The intended way is this. Now again, there are multiple solutions to this puzzle, but I think that's okay because ultimately I just wanted to teach the player how to wall jump and how to move objects, and by this point I feel that I've succeeded. And I can let the player creatively decide what solution they want to use. Now once the player is up here, this is another key thing that I wanted to do with this tutorial. I wanted to have the player standing on top of the wall, above all of the tutorial rooms. The reason why is to, 1, give the player a sense of achievement. I learned these things. It wasn't challenging, but it is some sense of achievement. It also helps to remind the player of what they learned. And what's so nice about the in-game text for the tutorials, yet again, is the fact that you can now read them from up above. So this really helps ingrain the tutorial in their minds and helps them to remember all the controls for later. Now the player, when they arrive on this bridge, is presented with this. It's a massive expanse, big and empty, with large blocks way out in the distance. Point of this is to make the player feel small. And I really wanted to open this world up to the player and start doing some world building. Stumbling more on my words here. So the point of this world building is to make the player feel like at least there's some kind of story. Right after you get out of the tutorial, you have at least some kind of story that you want to tell. And I think this is important to get started with right off the bat once the player is done with the tutorial. The player needs some kind of context for what they've learned, and this was how I decided to do it, was with this kind of world. It's a strange, very blocky world, but a world nonetheless. Now, what's also awesome about this area that's awesome is, well, I said awesome twice. Anyway, so the point of all of this as well, a second advantage to this is the fact that the player really feels a sense of height. Because the player feels so small in this large world, it can create this feeling of anxiety while jumping across those gaps. Now, I did them first try. Most players will likely struggle with those sections, but nonetheless, it normally takes some time, but I did it first try. So now we arrive at the first real puzzle in this entire level. Now we've had some smaller puzzles before, specifically in the tutorial area, but this time this is what I would consider a real puzzle. I present the player first with a conflict. I give the player an obvious clue on what to do by giving them this block and this pressure pad. The player soon realizes that the block can activate the pressure pad, but they see that it doesn't do anything. Player knows intuitively that this is a door and this is where they need to progress. So they need to figure out how. Since the player has provided this conflict and they don't see an obvious solution, the player begins exploring. Player will eventually discover this over here. Note that there are checkpoints. So the player discovers that this is a place that you could reach. Upon further investigation, the player finds this button. They press the button, and they're able to get back. The player then sees this button in the wall. They can't get inside. So the obvious logical solution is to place the block inside of here. Now note that I've used the same block, the same chrome texture, and I've used the pressure pads and the button multiple times. This is a powerful tool to help keep things intuitive for the player. The player learns what to look for and what to do with them. This is a tool that the level designer can use, this visual language, to help keep the player understanding the game at all times without having to explain it over and over again. Now you've solved the puzzle, door opens, and you arrive here. Now this is a form of presentation. The large, big door that slowly, gradually opens to reveal this massive room is really strong presentation. And this is a tool that a level designer can use to make the player more engaged with each area. It gives the player a sense of discovery and exploration. And it is important for your level design building. Now, currently we're, again, like on the bridge, we're jumping across all these platforms. Now normally, what I originally wanted to do, the original intention for this area was to fill the ground with, by the way, you can go up this way or that way. So the original intention of this big floor was to fill it with a bunch of jumping puzzles down at the bottom on the floor of this temple, and not to have it in the sky. But due to time limitations, I ended up building it on the sky to save time. The goal of it was to make a big, open, dynamic jumping puzzle that the player could go at from multiple angles. And I think I've still accomplished that, but maybe not to the same degree that I wanted to. It would have also made it a little nicer to navigate across this big open field instead of just sprinting across it with nothing to do. Now the player is given these blocks over time every time they step on a pressure pad. At some point, the player will enter this room and will discover, again, a conflict, which we'll go over a little later. And you will need these blocks in order to solve it. But let's go to the other puzzle rooms first to get the remainder of the blocks. This is my favorite puzzle in the entire level. This is something that I would almost want to make be a big theme for a whole level in and of itself. The puzzle is simple. You knock down these planks in order to, climb them like ramps. What I love so much about this puzzle is the fact that it's so clean and it's presented so well and it's very intuitive. The player can see that these planks are leaning up against something. So it seems to them as if they were somehow objects that were controlled, by physics. It's something that you could perhaps knock over. And the only tool that the player has at their disposal to knock something over from a distance is to shoot with left click. This is another cool little puzzle. Again, it's another very simple puzzle, but it's the classic elevator puzzle. You send the elevator up, and then you're on the floor of the elevator. Then you get off, you send the elevator down, you climb on top of the ceiling of the elevator, and then you get back up. And this gives you an extra bit of height. Classic puzzle. I've seen it time and time. Well, I've seen it a few times, and I just love that puzzle. It's fun. I decided to use it here. This puzzle is not much of a puzzle. It's mostly exploration. Point is to have the player be presented with a problem again. There's a platform up above that the player wants to reach, and there are a bunch of rocks. The player does a bit of exploring, and the player eventually finds a place that they can crouch into. Reminds the player that they can still crouch, and the player is able to press the button, climbs on top of the rocks, and is able to reach the platform. Now this final puzzle is pretty messy. I wanted a more complex puzzle for the final puzzle in this level, so I ended up making this. Unfortunately, it's a bit messy due to problems with the physics in this game, also with some problems that I have with the blueprints that I set up. Now, normally I would fix these things if I could, but I'm not much of a coder and I was a little short on time, so I ended up just leaving it the way it was. Now, the solution of this puzzle is not exactly the most intuitive thing. It's logical, but it's not extremely intuitive. But the player is presented with the problem that they need to get up onto the platform in a second. The player needs to get up onto this platform over here. It seems like the logical place to go. It's the only place that would make sense to be able to reach with the plank that acts like a, well, it's a balancing plank, right? So you have to get up there somehow. It seems like the only logical way to go by climbing up onto the plank. And the only way to gain enough height, since this cylinder is blocking the way, is to place some blocks over here, stack them, and make yourself a little staircase. And in order to do that, to place all the blocks on the one side, you need to have balance. So in order to keep this physics object from falling down and knocking off all of your blocks, you need something on the other side to keep it balanced. So the solution is not as simple as it might seem. It's not the most intuitive thing, but it is still very logical, and if the player thinks about it, the player can find the solution. And that's why I like this puzzle so much, is the complexity of it. However, I just wish that this puzzle didn't have so many bugs and problems. That's one of my only issues with this, is that there are bugs and glitches. And that's why I have this safeguard, this button here, to make sure that if it breaks, we can still progress. It's a little bit of management of. I'm not very good with terms. I'm a homeschooled level designer. Chill out. So the player steps on this pressure pad, and the door opens, and the player is presented with these caves. Now, something I forgot to mention was these cubes up here. This whole time, we've had these cubes that really just block the player's vision, especially these big ones. I can't see a thing. It's taken a lot of practice to be able to stack these up here, but these just block all of your vision. And that's something that I wish I could have fixed. Again, I did try to fix a lot of these things, but again, due to time limitations, I just wanted to get this out as quickly as possible, so ultimately I didn't end up fixing the problem. Now, I love these caves. It looks like a cave. I just love how the caves ended up in the end. I just wish that it wasn't so geometrically sharp. There are many sharp edges in here, and I think with proper assets, I wouldn't have to use the geometry tool to make something that looks like it was made in the 90s, you know. Again, with the block being in your face, it's kind of hard to do the jumping puzzle with this in your way. But now I have the glowing block, so now we can move on to the end of the level. Again, like the temple, the caves, if you noticed, were a bit empty, and that's mainly because, again, due to time limitations, I would have wanted to make the cave a lot bigger, and I wanted to fill it with lots of content and some puzzles and stuff, but again, I just wanted to get this done quickly, and I wanted to show that I could make natural-looking terrain just fine. Now the player is presented with this little room with not much to go on. What I wanted to do was have like cracks or something in this wall so that the player had at least some kind of indication of what to do. But I don't have assets or anything, so I didn't end up doing that. But the solution is simple. Blow up the entire wall. Wanted to make use of the destructible tool in the Unreal Engine, so I ended up using that. Now we place the glowing block here on this pedestal, and it now says, congratulations, you won. And that's the level. Now, I'd like to conclude and explain a few things. So, I'm very happy with the tutorial, very happy with the bridge, very happy with most of the puzzles in the temple, and I'm very happy with how the cave turned out visually. But I do have some issues with the temple being so empty. I have issues with the cave being so empty, and that's something that would just simply take time. It's not something that I'm incapable of doing. I just wanted to get this out there, and so this is what I have. You can judge me however you like. Now, I love that the tutorial is so clean. I love that the bridge is just fun. And the puzzles are nice and clean as well. And again, the cave looks very good, and I think it turned out great. Now, there were some issues when building this, and if I was working on a full project with people doing all these different roles, normally when I'd work on a big project, I'd want to collaborate and get other people that could handle things that I'm not so good at. So, for one, the physics and the coding, my coding specifically, which is pretty much all based around whatever YouTube tutorials I could find, definitely hampered the puzzle design. I think the puzzles, most of them were too simple. I wanted to make more complex puzzles, but I was just hampered so much by the code, and so this is what I have. But I am happy with the puzzles I do have. I just wish I could have designed maybe one or two more complex puzzles that were also clean. Now, a lack of assets. I only used the starter resources for the Unreal Engine, so that's all I had to go with. But the lack of assets definitely hampered my ability to design a very good-looking, presentable level, and it hampered some small things. I would have liked to have done more visual indicators of what the player should be doing, and all of that was kind of hampered a bit by a lack of assets. And I could have definitely sculpted a little faster, given if I didn't have to make things like the cave, for instance. If I had the rocks and assets to build the cave, like I guess I could have used the rocks that they gave, but I didn't want to use the starter rock. I was okay with using their texture, but I wanted to make my rock. You know what I mean? I just wanted to use my resources, so the lack of assets definitely hampered things. But overall, I think this level was definitely fun. It just needs a lot more work if I wanted to release this. If I wanted to make a final product, this would need a lot more polish, a lot more work. But yeah, I hope you found this rundown of my thoughts useful, and let me know what you think. You can go ahead and contact me. I'll provide an email in the description, and you can also comment down below what you think, and I will provide a link in the description to the download of the project. And I hope that you found this useful, and if you are seeing this and I sent this video to you hoping to get your attention, maybe I want to be a level designer for you or a game designer in general, I hope that this proves that I at least know what I'm talking about. And who knows how long in the future I'll be using this video. Anyway, that's all for now. I'll see you then.